Frieren. Beyond Journey's End. Prequel Stories. Translated by Gadgetized Panda Translations. Audiobook by Masquerade at Masquerade Audiobooks. Chapter 2, Stark. The day I became a hero. No good, huh? A voice full of deep disappointment came down from above. The young boy lying on the ground mustered strength in his limbs and managed to stand up. His body was exhausted. His entire frame was covered in dust, and the calluses on his palms were crushed. His youthful face still had bruises from being struck by the wooden sword. His name was Stark. He was a young boy living in the village of warriors. Stark panted as he picked up the fallen wooden sword. As he looked up, his sharp gaze met that of his father's. His father was standing there, looking down on him with a scolding glare. Stark could feel his father's anger and disappointment seeping through. Stark gritted his teeth, his hands trembling. But I can still. I've seen enough of your abilities. Don't humiliate yourself any further. His father turned his back on Stark. He walked a few steps, not even glancing back, and coldly stated, "A true warrior knows when to admit defeat." Stark was left alone. The strain of standing was too much, and he sank to his knees. He huddled in on himself, like an abandoned puppy. "Quite a beating you took there, huh?" A voice came from behind him. Stark turned to see a figure in a pure white cloak billowing in the wind. It was his brother, Stoltz. "Brother." Stoltz knelt on the ground, meeting Stark's eyes as he slumped down. Then, he gently patted Stark's head. "Are you all right?" "No, not at all. I can't even defeat the monsters or demons like this." "Don't worry." Stoltz smiled. "There's no need to rush to become strong. When the monsters or demons come after you, I'll..." Suddenly, the wagon jolted heavily, as if it had run over a large rock. At the same time, Stark, who had been sleeping in the wagon bed, opened his eyes. Just a dream. He sat up, yawning deeply and rolling his arms to loosen his stiff joints. His back was sore from sleeping on the hard wooden surface. The wagon was traveling along a road through a ravine. Looking up, the clear blue sky stretched out. It must be past noon now. Stark felt a bit hungry. Usually, he'd be helping his master prepare lunch, but things were different now. Stark had left his master, the warrior Eisen, just the other day. It was a fight, an argument. Stark had lacked the courage to face the monsters, and the impatient Eisen had ended up hitting him. Stark had then fled, the bruises from that day still aching. He had no intention of returning to Eisen. He couldn't even bear to face him. He had clearly worn out his welcome. And so, he had been aimlessly wandering when the kind family of a stable keeper had taken him in, leading to his current situation. "Remember, just hold the reins lightly. Don't get too tense." "Okay." Voices came from the front of the wagon. Stark shifted his position, kneeling on the pile of dried grass. He saw the stable keeper and his young son, with the boy holding the reins. "How do I stop it?" "Pull the reins. But don't do it now, we'll practice later." "Is it hard?" "Not at all. You'll get the hang of it in no time." They seemed to be teaching the boy how to handle the horses. Perhaps that's why he had that nightmare about his father. The warm interaction before him made him a little envious. The stable keeper noticed Stark. "Oh, you're awake. We're almost to the village." "Ah, I see." After Stark's reply, the man kept staring intently at him. Feeling uneasy under the gaze, Stark furrowed his brow. "Why are you looking at me like that? Aren't you Eisen's apprentice? So you recognized me." "I thought so. I've seen you walking with Eisen before." Eisen had been a member of the hero party that defeated the Demon King long ago. Though it happened decades ago, he was still famous around these parts. "Out shopping today? Not with Eisen this time, huh? Let's not talk about the master. We had a fight." "Rebellious phase, eh? That's not it. Wonder if my son will end up like that too someday. Just listen, would you?" The wagon crossed a bridge spanning the ravine. After traveling a bit further, they started to see scattered houses, arriving at the village. Stark thanked the stable keeper's family and got off the wagon. Well, then, time to get some food, he decided, and set off. Though a small village, it had an inn and a tavern. Staying here for a while wouldn't be so bad. He could find work and earn some living money, maybe helping with farm work. That's about all Stark could manage. However, there was one thing that bothered him. This village has a gloomy air. The people walking about all had anxious expressions. The villagers were tight-lipped, making the place unnaturally quiet. There was none of the usual liveliness, no children playing, no women chatting by the well. This village seemed devoid of any such activity. Was there a funeral going on? Stark tilted his head. Then an old man approached. "Hey, are you an adventurer?" "Heh? No, not really." "I see. Well, it's probably best if you don't stick around this village for too long." "Why's that?" "Just get out of here." As soon as Stark asked that, the old man's eyes widened in horror. Trembling, he backed away and collapsed to the ground. "Hey, what's wrong?" It's out there." "What is?" In response to his question, a thunderous rumble came from behind Stark. Screams erupted all around, and the old man crawled away in terror. Stark felt a horrible premonition. Holding his breath, he slowly turned around. A dragon had landed right in the middle of the village. With its smooth, red scales and massive, claw-like talons, it could easily stride over the nearby houses. Ah, so this must be the old man was talking about. Time to run. Encountering this right after arriving in the village, there was no way Stark could win a fight against it. Fortunately, the dragon hadn't noticed him yet. He had to find a safe place to hide. But then he saw it. A young boy and an old woman huddled near the dragon. Stark's feet stopped. If he left them there, they wouldn't make it. As far as he could tell, there was no one around who could fight the beast. But as a warrior, even an inexperienced one. There they are, the villagers whose names we do not even know. Still, he couldn't abandon them. Suppressing the urge to flee, Stark charged towards the dragon, his axe in hand, standing before it. "I'll be your opponent." The dragon let out a rumbling growl, looking down at Stark. Its scorching hot breath hit his face. Up close, it seemed even more massive. Stark was already regretting not running. The dragon's pupils narrowed to slits. As it raised its arm, its massive claws eclipsed the sun, gleaming sharply. The attack was coming. "Ah, I'm going to die." A strong sense of impending doom. But the dragon did not attack Stark. Instead, it slashed at the nearby houses. Without taking its eyes off Stark, it continued its menacing display, then eventually flew away, as if its task was done. Stark was drenched in sweat. He had been gripping his axe tightly without realizing it. His legs were still trembling. He hardly felt alive. I survived." The tension finally left his shoulders. He didn't understand why the dragon hadn't attacked him, but he was grateful to be alive. He never wanted to experience something like that again. Stark slung his axe back over his shoulder. Turning around, he saw the old woman comforting the crying boy. They seemed unharmed, but their expressions were still filled with anxiety, especially the boy, who was terrified. "It's okay, it's okay." The woman kept repeating as she stroked the boy's head, but he wouldn't stop crying. Feeling pity, Stark approached them, kneeling down to the boy's level. "The dragon is gone now. You're safe. But it might come back." The boy cried even louder at that. Stark panicked. That might have been the wrong thing to say. Was it because of his intimidating appearance? Hey, don't cry. The dragon is. Suddenly, a dream he had seen on the wagon bed flashed in his mind. Himself, huddled and whimpering from the harsh training, with his brother Shooterroot's voice echoing in his ear. "Don't worry." For a moment, the boy in front of him overlapped with his former weak self. What did my brother say to me back then? Racking his brain, Stark gently placed his hand on the boy's head. "It's going to be all right." He spoke with conviction. "If the dragon comes back, I'll take care of it. So don't worry anymore." Sniffling, the boy looked up at Stark. "Really? Yeah. I may not look it, but I'm pretty strong, you know." Stark grinned. Relief and admiration washed over the boy's face. The old woman beside him also beamed, bowing deeply to Stark. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to properly express my gratitude. Don't worry about it. By the way, who are you exactly? Stark stood up. Apparently, the villagers who had been hiding in the shadows and houses had started to emerge. They were all looking at Stark with pleading eyes, just like the boy. They must be anxious, fearing the dragon's return, just as the boy was. Wanting to reassure them as much as possible, Stark spoke up clearly. I'm Stark. I'm the top disciple of the greatest warrior, Eisen. A cheer rose up. Rippling outwards like waves on a pond, a sense of hope spread, bringing life and a spark of light to the villagers' eyes. As long as Stark's armor is here, we have nothing to worry about, someone shouted, and the mood shifted to one of triumph. The people who had been trembling in fear just moments ago rushed towards Stark, showering him with praise. The atmosphere was quickly becoming like a celebration. The villagers came to express their gratitude, and Stark responded with a smile on his face, muttering to himself inside, "What am I going to do about this?" Section. As Stark pushed open the doors of the tavern, the bell rang with a clang. It was around dinner time, and the place was crowded. Lively chatter filled the room, and the waitstaff hurried about carrying plates and mugs. Stark found an empty seat at the counter and took a seat. The well-groomed, grey-haired bartender approached Stark. "The usual?" "Yes, please," Stark replied. This was already a familiar routine. Stark looked around the lively tavern. The gloomy feeling he had when he first arrived in the village was gone. Everyone was cheerfully enjoying their meals. The waitress brought Stark his food, a meat pie and a cake. "Ah, I didn't order the cake. It's on the house. Today marks a year since you arrived." "Oh, is that so?" Nearby, a ruddy-faced man loudly announced. "Hey, everyone. Today is the one-year anniversary of Stark's arrival." The other patrons paused their conversations and turned to him. "That's wonderful. Today is a special day. We couldn't have this celebration if it weren't for Sir Stark. To our village hero, Master Stark." The customers raised their mugs and glasses in a toast. Stark managed a wry smile, feeling a slight twinge of uneasiness. It had been a year since Stark came to this village. The dragon still lurked on the outskirts, and the situation had not changed from before Stark arrived. Yet, the village had a peaceful atmosphere, and that was because Stark was here. The villagers believed the dragon would not attack as long as Stark was around. Except for one person. Mitch, getting all excited over one boy. A remark that dampened the festive mood reached Stark's ears. He turned toward the source and saw an old man sitting at the far end of the counter, frowning unpleasantly as he sipped his drink with a sour expression. "Don't say that, Old Man Vance. Stark has protected the village from the dragon. Who's to say the dragon didn't just leave on a whim? Then why hasn't the dragon attacked us in a year? Why hasn't Stark defeated it in a whole year? It's obvious the boy isn't as impressive as you all think." The man frowned. He didn't seem to have a good response ready. "That grumpy old geezer," he muttered under his breath. The celebratory mood in the room cooled slightly. The man who had proposed the toast approached Stark cautiously. "Sir Stark, don't worry about it. That old man has been a bitter loner for a long time." "Ah, I see." Stark felt a bit guilty. The old man, Vance, was right. Stark himself wasn't confident he could defeat the dragon. But he didn't have the courage to say the truth. He didn't know why the dragon wasn't attacking, but the fact was that Stark had become the hope of this village. So there was only one thing Stark should do. He had to try his best to turn his lies into the truth. Section. Stark's training began at sunrise. Standing before the rock cliff on the edge of the village, Stark gripped his axe with both hands. Slowly exhaling, he focused his energy in his core and took an attacking stance. As he lunged at the cliff, he swung the axe with all his might. A deafening crack echoed through the area. Ripples formed in the nearby pond, and the birds perched in the trees took flight in a flurry. A large chunk was gouged out of the rock, with pebbles raining down from above. Stark sighed. Not enough. The dragon's sturdy scales would still be too much for this. He needed to increase the power. Stark continued his training, conditioning his body and swinging the axe. Time passed, and morning gave way to noon. As Stark sat down on a nearby rock to rest, a young boy peeked out from the bushes. Stark. It was the same boy who had nearly been attacked by the dragon a year ago. Since then, he had become quite attached to Stark, often coming to watch his training. "Hey there. Visiting again?" "Yeah. Were you on a break?" "I suppose so." The boy approached Stark, gazing up at the gouged cliff. "If you keep training like this, the whole cliff is going to split and make a valley, you know? Then we'd have to update the map." Stark joked. But if this was Eisen, Stark's mentor, he might have accomplished it in just a few days. "Wow, warriors are really amazing. You can praise me even more, you know." "Ah. Superhuman strength. You've gone beyond the realm of humans. A monster. Wasn't that a bit insulting?" Flustered by the poor praise, I ruffled the boy's hair instead. He didn't seem too bothered, saying "stop it" as he escaped from my grip. "How do you become able to split rocks with an axe?" I'm not sure how to explain it. I just kind of got the ability one day." "So you came up with the training on your own?" "No, the master originally taught me. Things like the axe swing and how to put in the right amount of force, and all that. But..." Stark recalled something from a few years ago. It was around the time he first met Eisen. "The master was really bad at teaching, you know. Pay close attention," Eisen said. In front of Eisen were two massive boulders, about twice as tall as the young Stark. Yet Eisen had carried them here on his own back, something Stark always found astonishing given Eisen's small stature. Eisen approached the rocks, readying his axe. Then in one swift motion, he brought it down. Bang! He swung the axe down. A tremendous sound. Like splitting firewood, Eisen effortlessly cleaved the boulder in two, the halves rolling to the sides. "Alright, now you try." "No way, I can't do that." A 10-year-old Stark would never be able to. Even for a normal adult, splitting rocks with an axe is no easy feat. "The rocks are still too much, huh?" "Yeah, it is. I've only been wielding the axe for about a month." Asking a child who just learned to walk to run on water is like, "I could run on water since I was a child." "That's just weird, master." "I see." Eisen stroked his long beard in silence. Already sparse in expression, the beard made it even harder to tell what he was thinking. "Shouldn't you start with something softer for this kind of training?" Back in my village, we'd practice on bundles of straw first." "I see, straw, huh? Yeah. Wait, why am I the one giving you advice? It should be the other way around." Eisen's skills as a warrior were undeniable, but as a teacher, his qualifications were questionable at times. "I don't have any straw on hand." Eisen sighed in resignation and started walking towards the house. "Guess I'll just cut some vegetables then." Vegetables. And so, back at the house, Stark ended up cutting vegetables. With a knife, not an axe. Chopping onions and carrots on the cutting board. While he did say to start with something softer, vegetables hardly counted as proper training. His cooking skills might improve, but... "Hey, master. Is this part of the training too?" "Of course not. It's just that lunchtime is coming up, and I thought this would be convenient. Plus, what you need right now is muscle. Eat a lot and train your body. That's the priority." "I see." At least he had a proper reason for it. Stark felt a little reassured. They simmered the chopped vegetables in a pot, making a vegetable soup. Sitting at the table, they had an early lunch. Eisen skillfully brought the soup to his mouth through the gaps in his beard, neither praising nor criticizing the taste, simply eating in silence. The long stretches of quiet made Stark uneasy. Just as he was about to try striking up a conversation, Eisen called his name. "Stark. What is it? Do you know what the most important thing is in training?" Stark thought about it for a moment, tilting his head. "Willpower? No. The answer is spirit and patience." "Isn't that pretty much the same as willpower?" Eisen said the most important thing, but then listed two. But Stark decided not to point that out. "Willpower is fine then." "Well, as magic is of the realm of the imagination, an unyielding spirit can forge a body of steel. That's why spirit and willpower are so crucial. With a strong heart, you can endure even the most grueling training. But you shouldn't just blindly push yourself either. It was a surprisingly insightful lesson. Even when it came to philosophy, there was a peculiar persuasiveness to Eisen's words. And that resonated with Stark, causing him to avert his eyes and chuckle self-deprecatingly. But I'm a coward who abandoned my family and ran away. A strong heart I don't have. I'm a coward too. Eisen looked at Stark directly as he said this. Without sympathy or self-deprecation, just stating a fact. Somehow, that made Stark feel a sense of relief. I see. The conversation ended there, and they resumed their meal. When they finished the soup, Eisen stood up, declaring, "All right, this afternoon's training will be squats while carrying rocks, 1,000 representatives. That's way beyond the realm of just willpower." "Well, he's not a bad master after all," Stark said reflectively. The young boy who had been listening then asked, sounding a bit anxious, "Don't you ever want to go back to the master's place?" To be honest, it feels kind of awkward to meet him. I think he's probably not angry anymore, though." "I see." The boy's expression didn't lighten much. Perhaps he had thought Stark would return to the master's place. "I'm not leaving this village until I've defeated the dragon." Hearing that, the boy visibly relaxed, letting out a sigh of relief. It was about time for lunch. Stark paused his training and headed back to the village. After parting ways with the boy, he headed to the usual tavern. As he was about to enter, he heard a pained groan. "Ooh," coming from the back of the tavern. Curious, Stark went around to investigate. There, he found an old man retching against the wall. It was Vance. Probably from drinking too much, as Stark had seen him passed out drunk at the tavern before. Stark felt awkward just ignoring it, so he approached Vance. "Are you all right?" Stark patted Vance's thin, bony back. Vance, realizing it was Stark, quickly pushed his hand away. "Ah, sorry. Wait, it's you." Vance wiped his mouth hastily with his sleeve and glared at Stark. "I don't owe you anything, you hypocrite." "Hey now, I'm not a hypocrite." "Then why don't you just go defeat the dragon already? It's impossible anyway. You're just a brat basking in everyone's praise." Vance retched again, his drunkenness clearly excessive. Stark started to feel a bit concerned. "Maybe you should cut back on the drinking a little. You're not getting any younger, you know. Mind your own business." "What's going on here?" The tavern owner came out from the back entrance. Vance clicked his tongue, as if annoyed by the intrusion, and turned his back on Stark. "Forget it. I'm going home to work." Unsteadily, Vance left the tavern. "Did Vance say something to you again?" the worried tavern owner asked. "Just a little," Stark replied. "I'm sorry about that. Don't take it to heart. It's not your fault, owner." "Well, that may be true, but..." The owner's expression was unsettled. Stark had noticed before that the owner seemed to be overly accommodating of Vance, never complaining even when Vance spent all day at the tavern, patiently listening to his rambling complaints. The owner sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You see, Vance lost his wife to illness about 10 years ago. He's been kind of self-destructive ever since. He used to be a kind man, but I had no idea." "Ah, well, it's not your concern. And it was so long ago. He really ought to start moving forward, you know?" With that, the owner went back inside. It was a sad story. Vance could be quite harsh on Stark, but now Stark felt a pang of sympathy for him. The pain of losing a family member was something Stark could understand. As Stark was pondering how he might help reconcile them, a strong gust of wind blew through. Stark looked up at the sky. "Looks like a storm is coming." Section. That night, as Stark had predicted, the weather had turned foul. The wind had picked up sharply in the afternoon, and the rain started in the evening. The sky was blanketed in thick clouds, with occasional flashes of lightning. Stark had wrapped up his training early and was holed up in his room at the inn. As the night wore on, the rain only grew heavier. It didn't seem like it would let up anytime soon. Listening to the patter of raindrops against the window, Stark suddenly heard a voice calling out from outside, "Hey!" He got up from the bed and looked out. He could see small flickering lights, people with lanterns hurrying through the village. What's going on? Had a horse escaped, perhaps? The atmosphere seemed quite serious. Concerned, Stark left his room. Pushing against the heavy, wind-blown door, he stepped outside, instantly drenched by the rain. "What's happened?" he asked, catching one of the young men. "Ah, Stark. It's that Vance hasn't come back yet," the young man said, distressed. "That old man?" "Yes. It seems he went hunting and hasn't returned. We're searching for him, but haven't found him yet." "That's serious. I'll help look for him." "Thank you. But..." The young man's face clouded over. "Probably, Vance is somewhere in the forest. We'd like to expand the search there, but the area outside the village is very dangerous, lots of landslides. If we get caught up in one, it could be disastrous. When it rains, the ground becomes unstable, making landslides more likely. Especially in the forested areas with steep slopes, a major disaster could occur at any moment." Vance seemed to be in trouble. Perhaps he was stuck due to a landslide, or he might have been injured and unable to move. Regardless, someone had to hurry and help him. "I'll go." "No, you can't. Even if you're Sir Stark, if you get caught in a landslide. Compared to a dragon, that's nothing." Borrowing a lantern from a villager, Stark dashed into the forest. He couldn't just sit idly while someone's life was at risk. Plus, there was a sense of indebtedness towards Vance. If he had admitted his lack of courage to face the dragon, perhaps the villagers wouldn't have scorned Vance. Through the muddy ground and into the dark forest he ran. "Hey, Grandpa Vance," Stark called out, trying to be heard over the wind and leaves. The forest was vast, much larger than the village, and with no moonlight, darkness enveloped everything. He had to rely on the lantern. Stark continues to run in the darkness. His clothes weighed heavy with rain, and the cold seeped in. He was losing strength faster than anticipated. Would he really find Vance just by running around the forest alone? Just when Stark was beginning to feel uneasy, the sky shines brightly. Suddenly, the sky lit up, and a loud boom echoed. Whoa! His heart jumped. It seemed lightning had struck nearby. With the rain, there was no risk of fire, but it startled him nonetheless. Pressing a hand against his pounding heart, he tried to steady himself. Now, real fear crept in. With poor visibility, a landslide could occur any moment. It might be better than fighting a dragon, but the risk of death remained. Maybe he should turn back. No one would blame him. But then Stark thought, if it were Eisen or Stoltz, they wouldn't abandon someone they could save. He started running again. His legs still had strength. It was too early to give up. An hour later, he found Vance. Grandpa. Vance lay at the bottom of a slope, likely having slipped and fallen. Gently putting the lantern in his mouth, Stark carefully made his way down the steep slope. It wasn't too high, so Vance should still be alive. "Grandpa, are you alive?" He shook his body, and Vance let out a faint groan, opening his eyes. "What is it, kid? You again?" His voice was barely audible. He seemed very weak. "Sorry about that. Is anything hurting?" "Probably my leg is broken. Other than that, I should be fine." "Got it." He made a splint with a sturdy branch and secured Vance's leg. When he tried to hoist him onto his back, he shuddered. His body was cold as ice. He had to get him back quickly. Carrying Vance, he climbed back up the slope. His knees cried out, and exhaustion weighed heavily. But he pushed his body to its limit, desperately heading back to the village. "Why did you come to rescue me?" Vance said in a hoarse voice. "Someone like this old geezer with no family. You should have just left me here. Even if you have no family, I don't want you to die in a place like this." "Chimpage. What would you know?" "I know. My family is all gone too." Walking and talking was tiring for Stark, but he had something he wanted to tell Vance. "You know, what you said is actually pretty spot on," he said, Stark voice carrying a note of introspection. "I don't have the courage to fight the dragon, and everyone praising me has probably gone to my head. I've never been praised by my dad or my teacher before." He hopped from stone to stone, crossing the roaring river, Stark thoughts churning. "The people in this village are all so kind," he continued, Stark words thoughtful. "They're probably keeping the truth from me so they don't disappoint me, But that might be backfiring. Vance didn't say anything, but he could hear the faint sound of him taking a breath. You're strong, you know. Heh. You're stronger than I thought. With your upbringing, I'm surprised you haven't become bitter towards the world. You're still kind to people. You're a stronger person than me. Stark felt he had a bit of a misunderstanding. It's not like I've always been treated coldly. My brother was kind, and my teacher was strict but not a bad person. It's not been all hardship like you're thinking. I see. But still, it's nice to be praised like this. Vance let out a small chuckle. You might actually be able to defeat the dragon. Grandpa, Stark called, but Vance didn't respond. The weight on his back felt heavier. No way. Stark held his breath. Hey, Grandpa, are you all right? Grandpa, hey, shut up. Let me sleep. Sorry. Thankfully, he was still alive, and seemed to be doing all right. Stark stopped talking and focused on walking. They were almost out of the forest. Section. Yes, Sir Stark safely carried Vance back. The tavern keeper placed a fruit platter on the counter. Today the tavern was closed, with only the keeper and one other person inside. At such a young age, he's quite remarkable. Even the stubborn old Vance has taken a liking to Sir Stark. If we took a poll in this village, Sir Stark's approval rating would be 100% for sure. I see. He's doing well, then. We'd love to keep him here forever. But it wouldn't be good to confine such a courageous young man to this small village. If he travels, I'm sure he'll become a great warrior. No doubt about that. By the way, do you really not want to meet him? Mr. Eisen. Eisen plucked a grape from the plate and popped it into his mouth through his beard. I just came to check on the situation. No need to meet him. Stark probably doesn't want to see my face either. After swallowing the grape, Eisen let out a small sigh. That's just an excuse. The truth is, it would be awkward to meet him. The keeper smiled. But Sir Stark doesn't resent you, Eisen. He's a kind boy. But that's not the issue here. I see. Eisen silently continued eating the fruit on the plate. When he finished, he placed some money on the table and stood up. Keeper. About my coming here. I won't say a word. I understand. This is your 5th time visiting. Appreciate it. The keeper was about to say something more, but held his tongue. It was probably none of his business. Eisen. The keeper stopped Eisen as he was leaving. What is it? Do you think Sir Stark can defeat the dragon? Eisen, who usually showed no emotion, seemed to smile then. Of course he can. Section. Stark stopped and looked back at the path. There was the village he had called home for 3 years. Even without him, its peace was maintained. The dragon that had terrorized the villagers had already been slain by Stark. What's the matter, Mr. Stark? Fern, who was walking in front, asked. Nothing. I was just curious about the state of the village. If you're feeling homesick, you can turn back. It's not that I'm homesick. Well, maybe a little. I did live there for 3 years. There were times the kindness of the villagers pained him, but overall it had been a fulfilling 3 years. He could have stayed a little longer, but I've decided to follow you all. And you need a vanguard for this party, don't you? So I can't turn back now. Fern's expression softened. We're counting on you. All right, leave it to me. But next time, don't just rely on me, fight alongside me, okay? You coward. Too harsh. Stark gets teary-eyed. But the friendly banter continued as they caught up to Frieren, who was leading the way. End of chapter 2.